There's a moment in every collapse when reality splits in two. On the surface, everything looks normal. Lights still flicker on. Paychecks still land. Store doors still open at 9 in the morning. But beneath that ordinary rhythm, something fundamental is shifted. A number changes. A shipment fails to arrive. A credit line tightens. And by the time anyone says the word crisis out loud, the transfer of power has already happened. In April 2020, the world watched oil prices do something that felt impossible. Futures didn't just fall, they went negative. Traders were paying buyers to take oil off their hands. The fuel that drives armies, ships, planes, tractors, factories, the foundation of modern civilization, was suddenly priced below zero. Most people treated it like a bizarre headline, a glitch, a temporary anomaly. But here's the uncomfortable question. If oil can go below zero, what does that say about the systems built around it? And if your country depends directly or indirectly on subsidized oil flowing in from abroad, what happens when that flow becomes uncertain, erratic, or politically fragile? For Cuba, this is not theoretical. It's memory. When the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, Cuba lost roughly 80% of its trade almost overnight. Oil shipments evaporated. The electricity grid buckled. Public transportation shrank dramatically. Agricultural output plunged. Daily caloric intake dropped so sharply that average body weight fell across the population. GDP contracted by more than a third. The government called it the special period. It sounded administrative, neutral, but for ordinary people it meant blackouts that lasted half the day. It meant cooking with improvised fuel. It meant bicycles replacing buses and oxen replacing tractors. Energy vanished, and with it, the illusion of permanence. Fast forward to 2026. The global energy landscape is volatile. Oil markets have experienced whiplash cycles of collapse and recovery. Geopolitical alliances shift, sanctions tighten and loosen, shipping insurance fluctuates, credit risk expands and contracts. The world is more interconnected than ever, and that interconnectedness hides fragility. Because oil isn't just fuel, it is fertilizer. It is shipping capacity. It is electricity. It is tourism transport. It is the invisible glue holding together supply chains that stretch across oceans. When oil hit zero, it wasn't just about barrels sitting in storage. It was about demand evaporating and systems freezing. It was about what happens when confidence breaks faster than contracts can adjust. For Cuba, heavily reliant on energy partnerships and external trade agreements, prolonged instability in oil markets does something subtle but dangerous. It stretches the margins. And collapse always begins at the margins. At first, nothing dramatic happens. Energy shipments arrive slightly delayed. Payment terms are renegotiated quietly. A partner country struggling with its own fiscal constraints scales back favorable arrangements. Import invoices take longer to clear. Fuel allocation becomes tighter but not yet alarming. Life continues. But pressure accumulates in places most citizens never see. Ministries run projections. Foreign reserves shrink by increments. Importers compete for hard currency. Central planners juggle obligations. Fuel, medicine, food, infrastructure maintenance. Trade-offs multiply. And here's the mystery most people miss. Collapse does not arrive with noise. It arrives with math. If Cuba must pay closer to market rates for oil while earning less foreign exchange from tourism or exports, something has to give. Either consumption falls or debt rises. Either blackouts increase or reserves drain. The system chooses quietly. Fuel shortages mean fewer buses. Fewer buses mean workers arrive late. Factories operate at partial capacity. Agricultural distribution slows. Refrigeration systems strain. The power grid becomes less stable. Rolling blackouts extend by an hour here, 2 hours there. People adapt. Candles reappear. Generators hum. Schedules shift. Complaints circulate. But adaptation masks deterioration. Currency pressure builds next. When foreign currency inflows weaken, importers bid up exchange rates in unofficial markets. The gap between official and street rates widens. Citizens notice before policymakers acknowledge it. Those with savings in local currency feel unease. Those with access to dollars feel insulated for now. And here is where unpredictability enters. Sometimes collapse accelerates not because of shortages, but because of anticipation. If people believe fuel will be scarce next month, they stockpile this month. If they believe currency will weaken next quarter, they convert now. Expectations amplify strain. The result? A feedback loop. Tourism complicates the picture. Foreign visitors bring dollars, euros, and other hard currencies, but oil shocks often coincide with global downturns. Flights decrease, travel budgets shrink, visitor numbers fall. The very sector that cushions the economy contracts at the same time energy costs rise. It's not one shock, it's convergence. Now ask yourself, what survives in that environment? Not everything collapses uniformly. Large centralized institutions, state-run enterprises with fixed wage obligations and rigid procurement systems, struggle to pivot. Their supply chains depend on formal channels. When foreign currency is scarce, those channels clog. Meanwhile, small private entrepreneurs operating in semi-formal markets adapt faster. They source goods through alternative networks. They adjust prices dynamically. They transact in hard currency when possible. Informal markets expand. Remittances from abroad become lifelines. Families with relatives overseas gain resilience. Those without such networks feel sharper scarcity. Power shifts quietly from centralized allocation to decentralized improvisation. But this shift is uneven. And that unevenness breeds tension. Public sector workers, teachers, doctors, administrators paid in fixed local salaries see purchasing power erode. Pensioners face the slow squeeze of rising prices against static incomes. Import-dependent small businesses face rising costs. Those able to earn or access foreign currency buffer the shock. Inequality widens not because collapse creates inequality, but because it reveals it. And here's the deeper layer. Energy shocks don't just strain economics, they strain psychology. When blackouts lengthen, trust shortens. When exchange rates fluctuate, expectations narrow. Long-term planning gives way to short-term survival. Investment slows, entrepreneurship becomes cautious. Ambition contracts. But unpredictability can also produce surprising resilience. During the special period, urban agriculture flourished. Rooftops became gardens. Vacant lots turned into food plots. Bicycles flooded streets. Community repair workshops emerged. Cubans improvised solutions with remarkable creativity. History suggests that what survives is not scale, it's adaptability. Yet adaptation comes with cost. When systems operate under constraint for extended periods, maintenance is deferred. Infrastructure ages faster. Debt accumulates. Future capacity shrinks. What looks like stabilization may actually be compression deferred. And then comes the mystery no one can predict precisely: tipping points. Sometimes collapse accelerates unexpectedly. A partner government changes policy. A sanction expands. A natural disaster disrupts infrastructure. A banking channel freezes. A diplomatic alliance shifts. When energy is scarce and reserves are thin, even minor shocks can cascade. But here's the twist. Collapse does not erase agency. It reallocates it. Informal networks gain influence. Access to foreign currency becomes leverage. Entrepreneurs who can operate outside rigid procurement channels gain advantage. Families diversify income streams. Communities pool resources. Survival becomes decentralized. For Cuba in 2026, the convergence of oil volatility, tourism fragility, and structural inefficiencies creates a landscape of compressed choices. Does the government liberalize further to attract foreign investment and ease currency pressures? Does it tighten control to manage scarcity? Does it diversify energy sources aggressively? Or does it rely on temporary relief from shifting geopolitical alignments? Each path redistributes power differently. If reforms accelerate, private enterprise expands influence. If controls tighten, centralized authority reasserts dominance, but at the cost of flexibility. If external partnerships diversify, dependence diffuses. If not, exposure remains concentrated. Oil hitting zero was symbolic, but symbolism matters. It demonstrated that even foundational commodities can invert expectations, that markets can break assumptions overnight, that pricing mechanisms tied to global confidence can swing beyond imagination. For an island economy deeply entwined with energy geopolitics, that lesson is profound. When assumptions fail, resilience is tested not by ideology but by structure. Is the system flexible enough to adjust? Are exchange mechanisms transparent enough to maintain confidence? Are external partnerships diversified enough to absorb shocks? And here is the final surprise. Collapse often feels catastrophic in real time, but in hindsight, it looks like transformation. The special period did not erase Cuba. It reshaped it. It forced decentralization in some sectors, tightened control in others, and embedded improvisation into daily life. The question for 2026 is not whether hardship will occur. It is what will emerge from it. Will new private enterprises take root? Will renewable energy projects expand to reduce oil dependency? Will digital marketplaces bridge supply gaps? Will diaspora networks deepen economic integration? Because every crisis plants seeds alongside scars. When oil hit zero, it signaled vulnerability in global demand and financial systems. For Cuba, it echoed a historical memory of sudden energy loss. But memory is not destiny. If anything, history suggests that survival depends on recognizing fragility before it becomes irreversible. The most dangerous phase of collapse is not the blackout. It's the denial before the blackout, the moment when everything looks almost normal and therefore feels safe. By the time shortages are undeniable, leverage has shifted. Currency dynamics have adjusted. Informal hierarchies have formed. Power has relocated. So what survived when oil hit zero? Adaptability survived. Informal exchange survived. Family networks survived. Creativity under constraint survived. What weakened were rigid structures built on predictable external inflows. Energy is leverage. Currency is confidence. Institutions are frameworks. Remove one pillar and the others bear more weight. For Cuba in 2026, the story is still unfolding. It is not a single dramatic implosion, but a series of adjustments, some painful, some ingenious. Collapse is rarely absolute. It is layered, uneven, and surprising, and within that unevenness lies both risk and opportunity. If you understand how energy shocks redistribute power, how currency pressure shifts, influence how informal networks rise when formal systems strain, you begin to see beyond headlines. You see patterns. You recognize early signals. You understand that survival belongs not to the largest system, but to the most flexible one. And perhaps that is the most unsettling realization of all. Because when oil can hit zero, the impossible becomes possible. And when the impossible becomes possible, the only thing that truly survives is the capacity to adapt before the world notices you had to.